staffing's been a persistent issue. What can you do to improve? How are you doing? What can you do to improve the staffing, especially how odd the job market has become for all types of employees?
Sure. So it's always been a challenge in the profession of policing to attract young applicants to the positions. And I think the last 2 years it's become even more of a challenge for all police departments, not just the Tucson Police Department. So we have to recognize also, as you stated, Craig, in the great resignation or just jobs becoming so competitive in a job market of how do we recruit the future talent? My position on that is we are about 128 officers short of what we're authorized to be, with about 45 of those vacant PCNs are in different stages of training. So we do have great applicants, and I can tell you that because I worked out with the most recent class my first week on the job. And I left there being inspired that we have a lot of great young adults who want to be part of the profession. And so I am excited. But how do we recruit them at a larger rate? That gets where it gets to be a little bit more challenging and more complicated. First, I think our officers have to be the best recruiters. I think our officers and the staff that are out in the field, our community service officers and our police officers who are out there meeting the community every day, have the opportunity to be our best recruiters.
Now, are there some cultural challenges here too that make people go like, well, do I want to be in police work or not?
There is. I think, I never want the community to be desensitized to the fact that we give these young adults 9 months of training, and then we give them a gun and a badge and a camera, and we expect them to go out there and be experts in a lot of different areas, and they're not. It takes 3 to 5 years to become a well-rounded officer, but during that time where if you're a new journalist, you might make mistakes and you get several cuts. We don't afford those same opportunities for our young police officers. They have to be perfect. We expect perfection every time they go out and do their job.
Now, I understand that there is, a new effort to merge police resources, if merge is the correct word, with other community resources in a general crime fighting and crime prevention effort. Tell us about that.
Yeah, great question. I think we're at a state, I think in the country and here locally, where the changing expectations of what police officers or firefighters go out to, or what emergency services that our emergency communication centers dispatch, has been challenged, and understandably so. Again, it goes back to, if I expect a police officer to be good at 500 things, we're all going to be really disappointed, Craig, with them not being an expert 9 months out of training. But I think when we pull back and we go, okay, what is the right resource for the crisis at hand? And what we've learned the last several years is by doing co-response models and different response models where we slow a call down when it comes into the primary PSAP at 911, a police officer or firefighter might not be the best resource for that situation.
So how would this work in practice?
How it works in practice is, let's say you're at home tonight and you decide that you're in crisis. And you don't feel like hurting someone else, but you're starting to move past being depressed and you might hurt yourself. So you have the wherewithal to call 911. If you don't have family or friends and you say, I recognize I need help, I'm calling 911. Right now, in a perfect world, then 911 is going to catch that call. They're going to ask you a series of questions. And because you might not have a weapon, or you might not have the means, or you don't want to hurt someone else, that's the perfect call where we could have somebody from the community who has a mental health training to come out and help you and get you to a hospital where you could get the right resources plugged in.
Now, does this take resources away from police, or does it free up resources?
So, great question. It actually takes a little more resource investment on the front end, right, which is a challenge because in the 911 center they have 15 seconds every time that phone rings, as the community's heard throughout last year. But we're asking our call takers to take a little more time to triage that call to the right resource. So in emergency communications, it takes more. But by them doing that, a firefighter or an engine and a police officer or two are not responding out to that call for service in the community.
Now, the term defunding is flying around and is kind of charged. Is this a defunding, a reallocating of funding? How would you describe it?
To me, the defunding conversation is really about the community questioning where local government is investing financially into their community. So I don't take personal offense as a chief of police to the defunding conversation. I think rightfully the community wants to know where their taxes are going and where we're investing money. What I would submit to you, though, is if we want the best outcomes and the best resources, that comes with training, it comes with technology, and it comes with resource investment, not pulling away from something if we want better outcomes or different outcomes than we've traditionally had.
So is money being diverted away into these other programs or not?
So I'm not going to speak for the city manager. What I would tell you is our budget hasn't been defunded or cut because of any current conversation or community conversation.
Now, I know the mayor's used the term holistic policing. What does that mean? How do you define it?
Well, I think when we talk about holistic, or when we think about policing, we think about maybe a motorcycle cop who goes out and writes tickets, or we get home and our house is burglarized, and we want the police to rightfully come and do an investigation. So there are traditional response models that we think when we think about the professional policing. I think when we get into broadening the scope of what police do, that we recognize we're going to play a critical role in the conversation about unsheltered in our community, which is impacting our entire community, not just one ward, not just one division, but our whole city, just like most major cities at a time where, while there's a lot of jobs, some people can't get jobs. So poverty drives a lot of the things. So it's really, when we talk about holistic issues, it's broadening that the police department is just one stakeholder, and with a lot of different stakeholders in an ecosystem where we can contribute to a conversation, but it might not be our primary responsibility to solve the problem that we're discussing.
So using the homeless as an example, I know you're already in some cases trying to get people into shelters, that kind of thing.
Which
So
we are, and the city's committed to that, but that's a really complicated question, right? And how do we make that happen? And why is somebody living in an unsheltered or unhoused status? And there's a lot of different variables that go into that. So that's a great question, where we look at maybe a housing first model and how that can be expanded to where there's not so much red tape or rules that would keep somebody who's right now is living out of their car or living on the street, that has a dog or has a loved one or has property, where some of the more structured housing might prevent them from having access to that.
But these are cases where police officer may know the resources and can help connect.
Yes, because the reality is that there's not many resources that are out there other than public safety resources after 5 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning on a weekend, when someone's in crisis or somebody calls a concerned citizen about somebody who's sleeping out on a sidewalk and it's 30 degrees outside. Those are the traditional response models, is that there's no one else to send. So since there's no one else to send, somebody calls 911 and we send a police officer or a firefighter out there. So I think it makes total sense that, again, we recognize as a community, it's not public safety's problem to solve, but we are certainly well positioned, because we have experience of being out there with these folks in crisis, to be a contributor to a larger conversation.
I don't think I've ever known a time where any government entity said, we've got plenty of resources, no problem. How do you allocate the resources you have? How do you decide what areas, what issues get of special emphasis at a given moment?
So there's a version of that for me as a chief of police, but I think there's a version of that for mayor and the manager of city council, and that's where we insert conversations like community safety, health, and wellness, where how do we better strategize, organize, and resource all of the departments, so that when we're trying to tackle one specific issue, that we're all pulling the same direction instead of pulling 20 different directions. But I think there's an opportunity through some of the federal funding that we have right now, where programs actually take money to run too. And so there's an investment at a local level with some of these major issues like unsheltered, like substance misuse, or even violent crime.
Now, what are some issues that are trending, either trending up or trending down? I'm thinking of things like property crimes, traffic issues, drug issues, all of that.
Sure.
What are the things that are competing for your attention?
Like most major cities right now, Craig, we are trending up in violent crime and our traffic fatalities. Traffic collisions are down. Less people are driving on the streets because more people are working from home in this new world that we're working in, and there's less property crime and burglaries because people are at home as well. But we're seeing quicker people be. Let me rephrase that. People are quicker to act and be violent. There's less of a connection to a relationship that we used to see in the previous 5 years of homicides, where there was some type of relationship that drew those two individuals together before that crime was committed. So what I would tell you is what we're tracking and watching and investigating ourselves and creating plans to address is that guns appear across the country to be getting into the hands of criminals quicker. People, out of 86% of our homicides last year, involved a firearm. So my call to action for the community is this: go the other way. If you're out driving today and you accidentally cut somebody off and they throw their hands up at you, don't honk back and throw your hands back. Just go ahead and make that next turn. Go the other way. You have a choice as the other recipient of how you react to the catalyst of another human being's behavior. So that's my call to action for the community.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, what do you hope the public will do in regards to these things?
Well, when it comes to violent crime or it comes to our traffic fatalities, some of the correlations is that, again, it's the short fuse that we're seeing across the country and here locally, that road rage incidents are turning into, and we've had those here in Tucson in 2021, that are turning into homicides over a road rage, over somebody cutting someone off in another vehicle. So don't get involved in the physical or the verbal confrontation with somebody, just go the other way. And if somebody continues to follow you, then go ahead and call 911 and we'll come out to de-escalate the situation.
Is there some feeling that people are just unhinged by the whole situation we've lived through for the past couple of years?
I think you and the viewers know the answer to that question is yes. I think there's no plan to live in a pandemic. I think there's a lot of scientific reasons of why we're seeing people have shorter fuses and be quicker to, it's hard to give you a 5-second response to a really difficult question. But what it boils down to is we live in a complicated world right now that's different than the world we used to live in, and there's a lot of drivers for that. But when somebody doesn't have a job and there's no other means to work, or they're just at their wits' end because they haven't had human contact, that's where we think we're seeing some of these rises in violence. As far as when we talk about traffic fatalities, what I can tell you is speed, alcohol, and/or drugs continue to be a contributing and almost unanimous factor when we're looking at these unfortunate incidents.
Now, I understand part of your background is traffic. Do you plan to do more on traffic enforcement?
We do. So I have already called to action within the department that we are not a victim to 86 fatalities just because that's the number, or 88 fatalities. My call to action to the staff is stop the aggressive drivers, stop the 20 over drivers, stop the distracted drivers, and have the interaction with them. I'm not calling for staff to write the ticket, but what I'm doing is I'm calling for staff to really take some ownership about the environment that they work in every day. But that contact can change not only the driver's behavior that you're contacting, but also everybody around. And I think this community knows. We've been talking about the TPD being short-staffed for some time, and I think there's a certain a segment of our community that knows without consequence that they're driving the way that they want to. Just last week, a motor officer pulled over an individual on Golf Links in Swan that was doing over 120 miles an hour around 10 o'clock in the morning. Unacceptable.
Did the guy say anything to explain this behavior?
No, he was arrested for that crime. He wasn't booked. He was field released, but we did tow his vehicle. So those are the kind of behaviors that we just have to educate the community we're no longer going to accept as a police department.
Now, we talked about your background in traffic. When you look back at your career and all the different assignments, please tell me a little bit about some of those assignments and how they kind of educated you for where you are now.
So I've been blessed. I had a really great career. I did a lot of operational things out in the field, and I've done a fair share of administrative duties. And I think that's what gives me the right skills at the right time to be the chief of police. I understand what the challenges are for the folks out in the field, and I also understand how tough it is to be in middle and upper management right now. So it's really drawing from those experiences. Many of the things that I've been passionate about through my career we're facing right now: traffic safety, violent crime, and substance misuse. So we've had nearly 500 overdoses and deaths related to fentanyl and methamphetamine use in this community last year.
How different do you think things can be a year from now with some of the things you have in mind to do?
I'm hopeful. I think right now, my hashtag in the department is hope is free. I'm hopeful. If I wasn't convinced that I could have a positive impact on the department and the community and a lot of the issues we faced, I wouldn't be back here home to do the things that we're about to do and for me to lead the department. But what I would say is, I think the exciting part that I'm looking forward to is being one part of a broader discussion. And I want to get community excited about feeling like they can impact crime in their neighborhood. I want to get other city departments to understand them partnering with us can have a huge impact on community safety. So it's really drawing all the stakeholders in. We often talk about crime and a correlation to TPD being short-staffed. That's not, I can tell you, I read the work and the resumes of our staff every morning when I get up and almost every night before I go to bed, because we generate reports of kind of what's going on out in the community. There's other conversations that other stakeholders play a role in, to include the county attorney's office, the city prosecutor's office, and our judges. There's other decisions that are made in this judicial ecosystem that impact the safety of our community.
When people express frustration about the police, maybe a slow response time or something like that, what do you hope they'll understand, and what do you hope they'll take as action?
What I hope they understand is that if you're in your house tonight and somebody starts to break in and you call 911, we're going to rival or beat most major city response time frames. We're looking at adjusting those right now. We're holding ourselves to standards that are 10 or 15 years old, and those probably aren't the standards that we can continue to meet as a major city, as the 33rd largest city. I think sometimes we forget. It feels like the old Pueblo. As natives of Tucson, we think this is just a real big, small town, and it's not. It's the 33rd largest city in the country, and 228 square miles is a lot of geography for our staff to cover. So if it's a level 1 or 2, which means you need emergency assistance now from this police department, we're going to be there to provide that to you. But if it's a lower level, if you've been gone all day and you come home and you found that your house has been burglarized and you've gone in and no one's there, it might take us a couple hours to get out there. And it might be a community service officer that comes to provide service to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be an officer in uniform to give you the service that we need to solve the crime that you've been a victim of.
Are you able to staff up on those community service officers? I know they're kind of a force extender, basically.
They are. So we're authorized at 87 right now. I've got 30 new hires in the academy as we speak, so I'm excited to report that. Before that, we were floating just above 50, but I see a world in our future where maybe, Craig, the department makeup looks like 900 sworn and 300 CSOs, where we really, the benefit of the community service officers, really, again, the idea of putting the right work in the right hands, but also that we can start to develop and generate future police officers out of a percentage of that staff. So we're going to create a career track where if you want to be a professional staff member, which this department needs to be successful, we're going to have that career path for you. But also if you're just graduating from high school and you're going to graduate this coming May and you're really not ready for a trade or to go to college, we've got a job for you, and it's called the community service officer.
I mean, what should the public understand about police use of force? I mean, we've had a couple of incidents where they were actually off-duty officers.
Sure.
And I'm guessing you can't comment on a specific case in progress, but what should people understand about police use of force, how they're trained to do it, the situations they find themselves in?
Sure. So here's what they need to understand. Last year we did have a lower number of 911 calls that generated a police response, but it was just about the 250 to 60,000 range. We generate less than 1,000 use of force incidents from those 260 dispatch calls for service, but that doesn't really paint the full picture of that. We have almost 1 million contacts with the community a year. So if you put that into context, 1 million contacts with the community, 1,000 what we would classify as reportable uses of force, so we're going to take a further look at what happened. So what I would tell you is, like any aspect of our life, as the chief of police, I'm going to continue to invest in the best resources and training and tools that our officers can have to have successful outcomes of de-escalating a situation. Some of the things that you talked about, I can't discuss obviously because they're ongoing reviews, but what I'll tell you is every use of force that we look at, especially the highest levels, I'm always going to look at from a standpoint of an administrative and, if warranted, criminal review of an officer, because that's what the community expects from us. But I'm also going to look at it through a lens of, was it preventable, and could we have given them different tools to give them a different outcome? I think we owe that to them as TPD leadership, and as a chief of police, I owe that to my staff.
What would be an example of different tools?
Different tools, for example, where we've invested in the last 5 years in, let's say, tasers. But tasers don't always work and they're not always appropriate. So what happens when the taser doesn't work? So right now we're actually looking at reviewing certain types of force that we had last year, about 100 specifically, where somebody was either defensive, a community member was defensively resistant, which means I'm not fighting you, but I'm not giving you my hands and I'm not giving you control. Or it could go all the way up to active aggression where you're trying to physically harm me and attack me. So what we're looking through that is, were there different techniques, for example, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, we call it BJJ, where we could teach leverage and using our weight in additional training to the staff that wouldn't require them to use strikes, which sometimes are not effective, and where the officer breaks his hand or the officer injures the community members. So there's other techniques that we have to look at. Could we be investing as an organization that would give best outcomes? But what I also want to celebrate and highlight, Craig, is that on our highest levels of use of force, that we have community involvement in reviewing and having a vote on whether or not that the use of force was appropriate by the staff member. And most major city police departments do not have that, so I want to celebrate that as well.
I think that's most likely going to do it, but is there anything you feel like you want to add? Anything you want to talk about we didn't ask you about? Anything you want to amplify upon?
Why don't you ask me a question about like how we want to be more strategic about our response to violent crime?
Well, just go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that we have to do, because we are at a point in time where we don't have the amount of officers that we would like, is we have to be more strategic with how we use the resources we have. So one thing we'll be talking about in the near future, Craig, is something called Place Network Initiative with P&I. And what that's going to allow us to do is to work with a neighborhood or a part of town where we're seeing an uptick in violent crime.
Yeah, maybe we want to wait on that.
Okay.
I kind of asked this question earlier, but this is a more elaborate response. So, let's see. Is you okay on sound there? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So when we look at violent crime, we have to be more strategic with the resources we have. So that's where we bring in data. That's where we bring in line level officer perspective, or detective perspective, or community officer perspective, or community. Sometimes the data is not going to support a trend where somebody's lived in a neighborhood for 10 years, Craig, and they say, hey, something's changing in the neighborhood. You know, there's been an uptick of unreported thefts or unreported car break-ins, or, you know, there's more shots fired in this area than I've heard, gunshots. And those are the things where we have systems like ComStat 360, where we marry the data, the officer's perspective, and the community's perspective to really be strategic in the way that we target violent crime. Or we have a program coming out called Place Network Initiative, which is going to be a very focused effort on if you're a victim of a violent crime today and you fit a certain age, the propensity for you to maybe become the next part of the violent crime cycle is high. And how do we engage you for you to recognize that, hey, maybe your behavior is going to get you in a position where you're the next victim or you're the next suspect. And so again, maybe a little bit outside of the confines of what we traditionally expect police to do, but it's us using our experience that we've had for decades and going, how can we be more proactive within our community as one stakeholder in a larger ecosystem to have a positive impact.
This sounds like it sort of addresses something we've heard from police for years, where they say, well, don't decide something's too insignificant to call about.
This is tough, right? So there's other ways than 911 is not the best way to communicate with us if it's not an emergency. So again, that goes back to the relationships that we've developed and where we're proactively going out into community, and they're able to provide us feedback on through that one-on-one relationship. Again, that's something that happens at a divisional level because we have 4 divisions within the city of Tucson that rival mid-sized police departments. So it's really scaling the communication at a way where it gets to the right person at the right time.
The way your staffing is, do police have the opportunity to build relationships with neighborhoods, community leaders in neighborhoods, that sort of thing, or are they just too busy?
It can be both. It depends on your shift. We have a variety of shifts, and depending on when that shift comes out, you know, I would say a lot of times our officers are working at 9 at night till 7 in the morning. They might be getting information from the daytime shift about trends they're seeing because a lot of our communities at home sleeping or not available. So again, it's really being more intentional and specific about the relationships we have. We are short-staffed, but that doesn't keep us from investing in the right areas and being strategic with our time to develop those relationships.